I'd like to call tonight's regular council meeting to order. Recommendation that the agenda for the regular council meeting of December 7th, 2020 be adopted as presented. Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded by Councillor 80. Any opposed? Motion is carried. Item 3A, recommendation that the minutes of the special council meeting of November 23rd, 2020 be adopted. Moved by
Councillor Scott Morgan.
Moved by Councillor Scott Morford, seconded by Councillor Randhawa. Anybody opposed? Motion is carried. Item 3B, recommendation that the minutes of the committee of the whole meeting of November 23rd, 2020 be adopted. Moved by
Moved by Barry.
Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Any opposed? Motion's carried. And item 3C, recommendation that the minutes of the regular council meeting of November 23rd, 2020 be adopted. Moved by
Councillor Scott Morgan.
Moved by Councillor Scout Morford, seconded by Councillor Niche. Any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, first we have a report from the Chief Financial Officer regarding the October 2020 budget variance report.
Thank you. Revenues and expenses in the operating fund are in line with the same COVID-related caveats of previous reports. There is no additional significant variances apart from those explained previously, which is a good thing. The utilities budgets are performing as budgeted and reported on previously. Capital projects are continuing where possible. Some have been postponed and will start in 2021. Presently, all are within budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Item B, you want to read out the resolution?
Thank you. Moved by Councillor Cunningham and seconded by Councillor 80 that Council review the applicants for the Tourism Prince Rupert Board and make appointments being Michael Cote and Craig Willett, and that Council release the resolution at a future regular Council meeting.
Thank you, and congratulations to the new board appointees. Next, we have the Water Utility Management Bylaw. Any further comments from staff? Nope. Okay, so the recommendation is whereas council is empowered according to section 194 of the community charter to by bylaw impose fees payable in respect of services of the city, and whereas the fees and charges associated with the existing utilities bylaw are expiring December 31st, 2020, now therefore council introduces and gives fourth and final reading to the Water Utility Management Amendment Bylaw number 3463, 2020, Sanitary and Storm Sewer Utility Management Amendment Bylaw number 3464, 2020, and Solid Waste Management Amendment Bylaw number 3465, 2020. Moved by
Niche.
Councillor Niche, second by Councillor Scott Morburn. Any further discussion on this topic? Okay, any opposed? Motion's carried. Okay, next. Any further comments on the cemetery fees? Okay, so the recommendation is that council introduce and give fourth and final reading to the cemetery fees and charges amendment bylaw number 3467, 2020. Moved by
Councillor 80.
Councillor 80, seconded by
Cunningham.
Councillor Cunningham. Any further discussion?
Councillor Cunningham.
Any further discussion? Okay, anyone opposed? Motion's carried. I'll just ask the council to maybe mute their mics until they want to speak. Okay, next we have a report from the corporate administrator regarding the zoning bylaw number 3462, 2020.
Thank you. The zoning bylaw identifies parcels of land in Prince Rupert as belonging to certain zones that regulate the use and density of developments and the siting, size, and dimensions of buildings and structures allowed in a specified area. Zoning also establishes and promotes minimum standards for health, safety, convenience, and public welfare. The city's existing zoning bylaw was passed in 2009 along with the existing official community plan. Given significant change that has occurred in the community in the intervening period, Council has provided direction towards the renewal of the zoning bylaw, along with the official community plan in 2020. We do have our planning consultant, Rob Buchan, on the line if there's further comments.
Sure. So I'll open it up. Well, actually, first, we got a motion that council introduce and give first and second reading to the zoning bylaw number 3462/2020.
So moved, Barry.
Moved by Councillor Cunningham, seconded
Niche.
by Councillor Niche. Okay, discussion.
I have some comments.
It's Barry here.
Councilor Miro.
Oh, okay, we'll go Councillor Moreau, then Councillor Cunningham.
Barry can go first.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Cunningham.
All I want is some clarification on containers. I noticed it's only being allowed in M2, 3, and 5, I believe. And I'd just like Rob to clarify exactly what that is so people at home or listening can get a grasp of what it is.
Are you on the line there, Mr. Buchan?
Hello?
Sorry. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you are.
Okay,
Yeah.
beg your pardon. I had a tricky mute button here. Okay, so the bylaw does restrict shipping containers to the M2, 3, and 6 zones. It does not allow it in the light industrial M1. And yeah, this is the solution that we came up with to concern with the location of shipping containers near residential areas.
Okay, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Councillor Moreau?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think maybe I just want to start my comments by asking a question to Mr. Buchan. Just what would be, in your recommendation, the best way, if I had any amendments to suggest, would it be to pass first and second reading tonight and then we can debate the amendments later? Would it be good for me to make those amendments tonight as I ask questions?
I think it depends on the nature of the extent of the amendment. If there are a fair number of them that would require some, the council wants some report back on, one option is just to go with first reading tonight, and then we could report back and you can consider second reading, or you could do first and second tonight. It doesn't matter. The whole point here is that we're not going to be able to go to public hearing until you've made the changes that you want. So you could
okay.
You could make recommendations for amendments at second reading, and they could be made.
Okay, so maybe with that approach in mind, then I'll just I'll ask my questions and provide my commentary on a couple of places that I might like to see amendments. So the first piece is on the secondary suite regulation. So I think that's something that's obviously long overdue. And will hopefully provide some greater flexibility to increase housing rental supply. Same thing with including provisions around short-term rental accommodations. Obviously, that was not ever contemplated with our first OCP, and we live in this new world of Airbnb and short-term rental accommodations. I'm looking specifically at 3.4.1 subsection C on the secondary suite regulations. You've got it written here that single-family dwelling attached to the secondary suite must be owner-occupied. And then following shortly thereafter, 3.4.1G and 3.9.0B, that a secondary suite must not be a short-term rental. So these two questions are linked to me. I'm wondering, what's the rationale behind restricting secondary suites to only places that people who own the property can have? And likewise, if it has to be owner-occupied, why would we want to restrict the ability for that homeowner to have that secondary suite used for short-term rental accommodation?
Thank you for the question. I think that this depends a lot on the policy approach that the council will want to take. If you allow secondary suites to be used for short-term rental, then they will be removed effectively from the general housing pool. And typically, with these short-term rentals, an owner is going to make more money. It's going to be more lucrative for them to be in short-term rentals, so it's going to be removed from the longer-term housing pool, which is required sufficiently in order to have some stability for your rental market. So that's answer to part of the question. And I think the other, what was the other half of that question, Councillor?
The other question was the rationale behind restricting secondary suites to homes that are owner-occupied. And the reason I asked that question is I feel like Prince Rupert, compared to a lot of other rural and remote communities, we have a lot of absentee landlords. So I'm a little bit worried that there might be an unintended consequence here where, there's quite a lot of absentee landowners that just have a series of rental properties. And if we put this restriction where secondary suite can only be in a dwelling that's owner-occupied, that actually might have the unintended effect of limiting the creation of additional rental stock.
That's a very good question, and this is again a policy decision that the council can take. In a lot of places where you have secondary suites, part of the public concern around them is wanting to maintain a residential and a stable residential neighborhood. So if both the units and the main unit and the secondary unit are rented out, there would be a fair assumption that it won't have the oversight that the residential may want to have that is provided by having the owner living there. So two rentals in one dwelling, in some places that would be an issue. However, in Prince Rupert, it may be just the thing that you want in order, especially in the context of a lot of absentee owners. What you would be foregoing there, of course, is simply the oversight of having the owner on site and looking after the property and making sure that the residential tone for the neighborhood is controlled because of the oversight. But it is a choice.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that response, and that actually leads me perfectly then into this next question then around non-conforming uses. So I'm wondering, first, if you can just explain a little bit about the proposed change in the zoning bylaw around non-conforming uses. I understand that it's a lot simpler now based on some of the changes to the Local Government Act, but if we were to pass the zoning bylaw without that amendment that I'm suggesting around single-family dwellings needing to be owner-occupied with a secondary suite, would that be considered existing non-conforming for existing rental stock where you had two rental units owned by someone that lives in Prince Rupert or not, but does not live in that particular dwelling?
Yes, so that would be considered non-conforming, and legal non-conforming if the suite and the house and the suite were built and occupied under a bylaw that allowed them to. If it was simply illegal to begin with, then it would maintain its illegality. So there is a test to whether something is legal non-conforming or not. Did you want me to speak to the change in the bylaw regarding the non-conforming language?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind the clarification, I'd really appreciate it.
Certainly. Basically, the existing bylaw quotes directly from the Local Government Act the provisions for non-conforming uses. So what it's doing is it's repeating the law. And good drafting practice is that you don't do that. The law already exists. So you don't need to, and you shouldn't go and make that change. And one of the reasons why is because legislation does change from time to time, and you may not catch that. So you could end up with a conflict between what you've written in your bylaw and what the enabling legislation actually says. But the best answer there is it's simply redundancy, unnecessary redundancy to put that into your bylaw. The law exists and stands on its own.
Understood. Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I guess two more questions. One was that in our prior housing work done a couple of years ago, we had previously considered as a council eliminating RM5 zoning based on a number of concerns that we had all expressed around that highest density housing category. But I see that RM5 is still included. So I don't know if this is necessarily a question for you, Mr. Buchan, or for the rest of council, but I've been operating under the impression that we would be removing RM5 just based on how high density that category is. And I think we had all agreed that it was not going to be used. But maybe we can discuss that after. And then I guess last question, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the decision that instead of rezoning a number of properties, particularly as it comes to this move towards the Vision 2030 document of having Midtown, Uptown, and Downtown, doing a conceptual map instead. I'm wondering, can you comment a little bit on the additional tools that the city would have to ensure that any new developments or redevelopments of existing structures, maybe vacant buildings, would be consistent with that stated direction to try to densify the commercial core? What are some of those other tools aside from the zoning bylaw, just by doing it in the conceptual map that we would have at our disposal?
Are you referring, Councillor, to the OCP bylaw?
I'm referring in this case to actually not I think I am actually, yeah, not on having not rezoned the properties themselves, but doing the conceptual land use framework map.
So the conceptual land use framework map that is in the official community plan is in there as a policy guide, that particular plan is very detailed and very fine-tuned. You may recall the presentation by Larry Beasley saying that Vision land use conceptual plan was just a concept and would more than likely change, in terms of how it's actually laid out and how the development occurs as the community goes through its various applications and its bylaw processes. So in a way, it's too prescriptive the way that it was laid out to be a good general guide for council to consider. So what we did with the bylaw is we said, here's the conceptual plan. It's here for you as a reference, as an illustration of the kind of mix that is contemplated in the general locations that's contemplated in Vision 2030, but it's not a land use designating tool. The land use designations occur in the OCP bylaw in statements at in broader statements that basically list out a long list of permitted uses, each within the three areas of the city core, the Midtown, the Downtown, and the Marina districts. So that designation occurs in the OCP broadly. So council has the ability and the discretion and the flexibility in rezoning applications to look at that broad land use designation statement and look for proposals that are consistent with it. It also has the ability during rezoning applications to refer to the conceptual plan as a guide, but that plan that isn't prescriptive. It simply is a guide.
You got at the core of my question there, just at that last sentence or two. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry for the long-winded response.
Do you have other questions, Councillor Moreau?
I'd like to say something.
I guess I'll just end by saying I'd be interested in hearing council's thoughts on those two specific pieces that I raised. The first being if we want to include RM5 as the highest density housing category, and then also around single-family dwellings with secondary suites needing to be owner-occupied. Those are the two specific things that I think may require amendment. But I'd like to know the will of council beforehand.
Mr. Mayor, if I could make a quick point about the RM5, that's a part of the question that I didn't respond to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. In looking at the zoning map, there is one property that's zoned RM5. So if you wanted to remove that zoning, you would need to change the designation on the map to a different zone at this point. That's the first point. The second point is because you have that in the bylaw as one possible zone, doesn't mean that anybody can apply for is entitled to it in a rezoning. It'd be council's discretion in the future as to whether or not to actually allow that. There are a few places down in the Marina District that contemplate higher density and taller buildings. That zone may be appropriate in that context, but I couldn't tell you without receiving an application. But right now, you would have to, if you want to remove that zone from the bylaw, we'd have to be replacing, putting a new designation on the map for that one property.
I'd like to speak. It's Councillor Niche.
Just before your comments there, Councillor Nietzsche, I'm just gonna to riff off what was that discussion for a sec. I think at this point, Councillor Moreau, I personally think we would keep RM5 in, mainly because I think what the planner is saying, particularly around the Marina District, there could potentially be a higher density area there that doesn't impact heights and views and things like that, and it may be useful in certain one or two contexts for the community, but I'm not sure if it needs to be completely removed. That's one thing. And then just with the secondary suite things, I think I kind of see where you're going with the owner operated. Are you getting at that you could have other people, someone own the home, but someone could be living upstairs and someone could be living in the basement suite, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the people that own the home? Is that what you're getting at, Councillor Moreau?
What I'm getting at is I feel like there is quite a number of instances where, whether it's a rental company or just a private landlord that owns a number of properties, where they have secondary suites, so they're renting out the upstairs to one family and and the secondary suite to someone else. So the dwelling is not owner occupied, and I think that the values behind wanting to do a secondary suite policy in the first place was we want to provide greater flexibility to ultimately increase rental supply in Prince Rupert. So what I'm worried about, or what I'm concerned about, is that the unintended consequence of not allowing, whether or not it's rental companies or private landlords, either in Prince Rupert or abroad, absentee landlords, is that they can't have 2 units being rented in the same dwelling if one is a secondary suite.
Right. Yeah, I think I agree with you on that point. I think they should be occupied regardless if the person lives there or not. And I would definitely be in line with that amendment for that particular purpose, for sure, for the next one, when we bring it back to us. Any other thoughts from council on that?
Yes. So I was going to speak to that too. Now.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Councillor Moreau, now when you were bringing that up, was that just in the short-term rentals, or is that actually in a different one also? Can you?
It's in secondary suite regulations 3.4.1C.
Yeah, because I am totally in the same page as you. I mean, that could take a lot of housing out of Prince Rupert if we were to eliminate, absentee landlords also, because a good portion of our properties are owned by people out of town, and if all of a sudden they were not able to rent out a secondary unit, that could cause a lot of issues and even more shortage of housing. So I am totally in agreement that needs to be changed also. And the second one is actually more to what Councillor Cunningham had brought up as far as shipping containers goes. And we had shipping containers. We've had workshop in the past when Zeno was still our planner, and we were kind of moving forward. It looked like to have shipping containers in the which would that be? That
M1?
would be M1, but there was
M1, yeah.
There was supposed to be regulations as far as they were supposed to be painted to match the primary color of the building, and that was kind of the direction we were working in. And I really do feel that this is going to have a big effect on a lot of business owners that have containers on site already, and to not, I mean, let's just say one thing. Whoever planned putting a light industrial area in a residential area was a bad decision in the first place, but we can't change that decision now. That was done a long time ago, and now we have to make sure that we work with those businesses in that area and the residents that are around that area to make it work. And I have a really big problem with containers not being allowed in the M1 zone. I think that if we were to once again paint them the same as the building, and they're done properly, not just containers stuffed randomly on site, but someone that is, you know, looking to use it as a permanent fixture, they should be allowed to paint it, and they should be allowed to keep it on site as long as it's maintained. It looks just like a steel building. It's not, you know, and if it's painted the color and it doesn't say Costco shipping on the side, then to me it's not a container. It's more of an accessory building. So I really think that needs to change. I will speak very loudly about that one because I feel that you will see a lot of business owners speaking out about that one too, because there's a lot of people in that light industrial area that use containers.
Yeah, and I think we had that discussion previously, just a couple meetings ago. That was the way we wanted to head in that, and I would be comfortable heading in that direction as well, as long as we need to put some language around what it looks like when they are in those zones, or in the M1, because that was the biggest problem, right, is around accessory buildings and stuff like that. So I think I would be supportive of an amendment like that as well.
Cunningham here, Councillor Cunningham. I support that 100%. I was going to speak on it after Blair, but Wade or Councillor Neese has pretty well hit a lot of the talking points I had. You know, that was rezoned improperly to begin with. There's a lot of people up there have done, you know, one bylaw or one bylaw doesn't fit all. Like there's some places up there they're pigsties. You know, it's that simple. You know, they've got to be cleaned up. They're containers that have just haphazardly been thrown on an empty lot and being used. And then there's other people up there that have containers. They have them with the roof above them. They're very neat. They've repainted them. You know, they care about their property in that. And I think that we've got to look at that very carefully, because that whole area there has a lot of containers in it. You have 2 or 3 people storing tires. You know, tire companies putting storage in them and that, and they're stacked up. They're very neat and they're well maintained. And then you go a half a block away, and it's like somebody's got pickup sticks just throwing a bunch of stuff in a lot, and that's causing some of the eyesores and problems up there. So you know, it's just I can't support not having containers in M1. To me, there's got to be some sort of compromise. Either we rezone it and then we're opening it up to a lot of other problems, or we look at that M1 area and we apply bylaw to ones that aren't kept neat and tidy and things like that. You know, it's you know, you drive around there and like, wow, you look at the way some of those containers are parked and maintained. They're better than some people's buildings in town. And I just think that the whole area should not be penalized for the actions of 1 or 2 individuals. That, you know, the bylaw that we were thinking of putting in about, you know, them matching the building or having steel cladding, it's like, when's a container not a container? You know, like if you put it to make it look like an outbuilding, or you know, maintain it properly, then, you know, it's a whole different attitude. And the way industry is going now and the storage in this town, we don't have enough storage and we don't have enough industrial land, and people have had to adapt to it in that that M1 area to accept all that. And it's something we've got to look at as a council and accommodate them as best we can. There's some very successful businesses up there that rely on their containers. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that then too, so the shipping container piece is under 3.19.0, and I can see a C app option being added with this M1, but I think what would be important is that we develop a list of criteria what that would look like in the M1 zone and not just be they're allowed in M1. I think that's a more sensitive topic and it needs to be addressed in terms of how we would want to go about allowing that use in that zone, because there is a visual element in M1s versus the M2s, which are more away from the community. So I think just to ask the planner a question then, so if we want to make some amendments here to this, do you want us to do that by resolution, or should we just ask for what some of the redrawings of some of the things we want to look at for the next reading?
Mr. Mayor,
I'd say
I'm asking Rob.
go ahead.
sorry. I think you could do this reasonably simply by passing a resolution to amend the draft to basically with the shipping containers to add M2 into add M1 into section 3.19.0B, and that would affect that change. And I would note that you have development permit guidelines in as a part of the OCP that would speak to the how they're finished and how they're regulated. So I don't think you need any additional regulations to manage the aesthetics of them.
Okay.
With respect to the secondary suites, you could make that change if by simply passing a resolution to delete section 3.4.1C and renumber, and that would take that one clause out.
Right. Okay. So before we might start making any recommendations and resolutions, I got those two noted. Maybe we'll just continue any other further discussion here.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, there was an edit that we were working on before, and if I could just check with the corporate clerk as to whether or not the change to the parking standards were met, or if we need to make a reference to that right now.
They have been corrected per your email, yeah.
It's been corrected? Okay, thank you.
Okay, so currently we're looking at changing 3.4.1, removing item C from that, which is the owner-occupied general secondary suites. Then we would be adding in 3.19.0, adding just M1 and allowing the development permit guidelines to regulate the aesthetics of those containers. Is there other comments about the zoning bylaw that council wants to bring up?
Yeah, I would like to ask a couple of questions.
Go ahead, Councillor Adie.
When I was reading through this, one of the things I did was to have this document in front of me and the old document up on my computer, and it's interesting to go through the two, and there's portions of each document that are virtually the same, and there are portions that are fairly significantly changed. And so those are the ones that kind of attract your interest. So one of the sections that changed quite a bit in terms of detail, and maybe I could ask Rob for some feedback on this, was the section on home occupations and home businesses. So I have a couple of questions related to that, if I could ask. First of all, I'm not sure I understand why there is a distinction between home occupations and home businesses.
Through the mayor, home offices are a form of home occupation that you could have in multifamily because they don't take customers. So it's expanding the ability for home occupation to that form of residential, which the COVID-19 has certainly raised as a need. I think, generally speaking, for us in British Columbia and Canada, with a lot of people working at home. So if you have an office and you're living in a townhouse or an apartment, that would be permitted. But you wouldn't want to have other home businesses in the higher density. So we differentiated between the two, as many communities do, in order to give some more flexibility.
Okay, so my second question was more about the home occupation one. This is a section that is quite a bit more specific and detailed. And I know I've kind of had informal conversations about this, so I know a little bit about it, but I wonder if you could clarify for everybody why that section is so much more detailed this time around compared to the original bylaw.
Okay, well, in general, we found that the regulations a little scant. And the purpose of home occupation is to make sure that when somebody's doing something that's in addition to basically, your domestic, your residential use, that you want it to fit in and not, be a problem for the neighbors. So we went and looked at examples of other bylaws in other places to try to get best practices on how to do that. Now, that doesn't mean, we're not saying that this is necessarily the written as perfectly as it should be for Prince Rupert. We think it's okay, but you may have some knowledge for us where something needs to change on this. But we put this forward as we think it's a good suite of regulations for home occupations.
Okay, well, I do think that there's probably an element to this that might attract some public interest, but that kind of leads me into my next question, and that's more a question for council and staff. The purpose of getting to second reading on this document here tonight is so that we can then put it to the public and seek public input. And anybody who knows me knows that I would always encourage people to pay attention, get involved, and speak up. I think that's really important. And I'm interested in the concerns and the benefits that people see in this. I'm equally concerned, though, that we live in strange times, and as the news tells us today, the current restrictions have been extended for another month. The whole concept of public hearing has become very much more difficult. So I'm interested in what plans there are to ensure that we can have a robust public process so that people can feel that their concerns, that they have access to us to adequately address their concerns.
That a question for Rob, or
I think I'm directing that question probably more at staff, and also ask for the views of other councillors.
I think at this point, we were going to try to do a public hearing at this meeting for the OCP, and obviously due to the health orders, we've delayed it. And I think at this point, we're just going to have to play it out by ear when it's appropriate for us to be able to host a public hearing. I don't think we rush into getting this complete until such time as the community has an ability to actually participate. So until, after January 8th is what the new orders are saying. I mean, I think we're going to have to just reassess in the new year and figure out what the right time that's going to look like. And I don't think anybody here has an answer, and the staff are nodding on when that's going to be. So for now, what we're going to do is, if any changes here to date we want to make, then these referrals will go out to various ministries for their eyes on it as well, until we can get some sense from different ministries on what they think about our zoning and all that. And then when the time's right, we'll bring the OCP and the zoning bylaw to public hearing. So I think it's just about reassessing in the new year and figuring out what that might look like. But I agree with you that with an important topic like this, we should wait to be able to have people show up and be able to actually comment on it. Now, the previous stage, we were able to have up to 50 people in the auditorium. We could do it safely, but right now there's just nothing like that allowed. So we'll just have to wait to see if we can maybe go back to a stage like that, and that'll be up to the provincial health authorities to let us know when that time comes. So on the engagement front, I think we just wait until the right time is there. But it's good to start this conversation now so that we can get it to the point for when we're allowed, we'll get the public hearing scheduled and get moving on it.
I would say that I agree with that, and if it has to take a little longer, I think, unfortunately, I think it's just going to have to take a little bit longer. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, these documents the last time we did this was 2007. So this has a long shelf life, and it will guide the community over the next decade, possibly longer. And so if that's the case, then I think waiting a few months to have the public hearing is in order for that, for sure. Is there other comments specifically about any amendments that council is going to want to make? We have two on the docket right now. I'm not sure if my RM5 answer worked for you, Councillor Moore, or not, but if there's a differing opinion there, I think the planner is correct that council's discretion at any time is not, we don't have to allow any level of zoning, and we don't really have properties fully that accommodate that type of zone anyways. So I'm not sure if it's a deal breaker if we have to remove it or not. And if council's Murrow is comfortable with keeping it in, I don't know if that'll be too hindrance to our vision of kind of keeping the community at an appropriate density, I guess. But other than those two and that,
all I would add is I didn't realize that there was only one property in all of Prince Rupert that meets that criteria. So that satisfies that concern.
okay. So is there other comments from council before, because this is the chance for us to make our changes before we hear from the public? Is there anything else from this document that is jumping out other than what we've already discussed?
Councillor Cunningham here. I tend to agree with Councillor Adey here that, we have a lot of small cottage industries in this town, whether it's a hairdresser or a music studio or something like that. And I don't think a lot of these people that have these small businesses in their private homes realize the impact that this bylaw could have on them. So I really think we've got to reach out to them. And I know they got business licenses, so we know where they are on that. But, in some cases, the business licenses are handed out simply because we know it's not going to be a problem. But, the neighbors that exist now might get along fine with something like this, and then neighborhoods change and people are going to say, well, I don't like that being here. So it's something that we've got to balance, because you can't have one person out of 10 saying, I don't want that here, and it's gone. So I really think we've got to listen or have input from the small businesses, cottage industries and that in town about this.
Yeah, and I think on that note is that any existing business that's in a residential zone now will be non-conforming. So whatever we pass will not apply to those businesses unless those businesses at some point cease to exist. So current business owners can feel comfortable that they'll be able to continue their use of their business regardless if we say yes or no to something. And under this bylaw here, if you see it too, is that anyone that wants to do any of the uses that we're saying are prohibited, they can still do those, but they have to apply for a special permit under the city, and then the neighborhood gets to be involved to be able to comment on whether or not a new business that meets those lists there would be allowed to be entering or not. So it doesn't stop it. It just makes it so there's more, the residents have more of a say, I guess you could say, if a new business of those natures move in. So I think the big message to current businesses is that there will be no impact to them, because any OCP that happens, as it says here, is that there's no change to their business. So if they're operating now, they can continue operating until such time as they don't want to operate anymore. So that they can be rest assured that any changes we're making through the zoning bylaw won't impact them. And if those concerns are there, then definitely we want to encourage them to come to the public hearing and let us know what those concerns are, so that we can hear a robust view of all that. So I just want to make sure that's clear to everybody on council here, that by passing this, it doesn't impact existing businesses, only future businesses that are trying to move in to do those particular uses. Yeah. So,
okay, I can live with that. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that's clear. So right now, we did move in second the bylaw. Is there any other comments before we introduce a amendment change? Okay, so then I would make a motion to make an amendment to the resolution on the floor, and that is to first change item 3.19.0 under shipping containers to add under section B, M1 to the shipping containers permitted use. And then to also change under 3.4.1 general regulations for secondary suite to remove or strike item C, the single family dwelling attached to the secondary suite must be owner occupied. I would move that. Any seconders?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Councillor Cunningham. Okay, so any discussion on that amendment? Okay, anybody opposed? Okay, the amendment carries. Now back into our regular motion, which was to give and introduce first and second reading to the zoning amendment bylaw number 3462/2020 as amended. Any further comments on that? Okay, anybody opposed? Okay, the motion's carried. And a great discussion. Okay, next, we're going to move on to our official community plan, which I'm sure there'll be similar themes here. Maybe I'll start with the corporate administrator, and then we'll move on to any comments from council.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The official community plan, otherwise known as the OCP, is an important bylaw that describes the long-term vision of the community development in Prince Rupert. It includes objectives and policies that guide decisions on planning and land use management, as well as defining social, economic, and environmental policies. The city's existing official community plan was passed in 2007, and given the significant change that has occurred in the community in the intervening period, council provided direction towards the renewal of the OCP in 2020. The recommendation tonight is that council provide for first and second reading of the official community plan bylaw number 3460/2020.
Okay, well, before we discuss, I would recommend that council introduce and give first and second reading to the official community plan bylaw number 3460/2020. Moved by Councillor Niche, seconded by
I'll second it.
Councillor Rantawa.
I'll second.
Okay, discussion.
One thing that I think is important with this OCP is the availability if anyone wants to look it up online, because it's quite a large document and it's going to affect just about every aspect of our city. And, you know, I know from past OCPs and that, 3 years after the fact, people, well, I didn't know anything about that, things like that. So I'm really hoping that there's an availability. If anyone wants to go online and look this up, they can find it.
There will be a link provided on our website. It is currently on the Prince Rupert Talks website, but there'll be a link placed on the agenda.
Great. We're also
Okay,
gonna...
as long as it's something I think we've got to get out to the public, so when we do have a public hearing on this, they are educated to a certain point. If they're not, then, you know, down the road we're just going to hear the same thing again. And, you know, they've got to get engaged now in this process if they want to make a difference, or if they don't like something. We've got to hear from them now. Thank you.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so in the summertime we sent a mail out to every single home in the Prince Rupert about the OCP, with a link to where they could access it as well, and then also held an engagement throughout September, the week of September, where we had different people and community groups come and meet with us to comment on the OCP. Now there's first and second reading, and then there'll be a widely advertised public hearing when we're allowed to do that. And then hopefully we can have an event somewhere at the Civic Center or something like that where we can actually have a appropriate public hearing on that. So I'm hoping that there won't be anybody who will miss the notice, because through social media and through the newspaper and mail outs to the home, I mean, that's pretty much trying to touch every single household and building that we have on this process. So I'm in full agreement that we need to make sure everybody has a total opportunity to comment on it. And so far the comments that we've gotten, which I believe we've had about 4,000 touch points or something like that throughout the entire process with the community, has been overwhelmingly positive to the direction that we're heading in. And obviously there's always little details that we're going to try to work out, but I think the overarching theme of where we're going seems to be very well received, and hopefully at the public hearing we're going to hear robust feedback from the community on it as well. Other comments about the official community plan?
Councillor Moreau here. I've got a couple comments and then a couple of questions as well for Mr. Bucket, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So just a couple of high-level comments. Strangely, this was one of those topics that got me involved on council in the first place. I felt that our 2007 official community plan left a lot on the table, and this is just something I've been incredibly passionate about seeing updated. So I'm very thankful to see how much of Vision 2030 has been able to be incorporated into this document, how much of our interim land use policy framework. I think obviously the single biggest change, or the biggest takeaway, I suppose, from Vision 2030 was the realization that our downtown footprint is about 3 times too large for our population. So the ability to be able to capture the midtown, downtown, and marina designations, I think, is incredibly important and transformative in the long term in creating a commercial core. I'm also really thankful to see the planning principles, not just high-level motherhood and apple pie, but actually has some meat and potatoes between sustainable cities, smart growth, complete communities. That's fantastic. And one of my favorite pieces as well is around the urban containment boundary with our proposed sequencing of infill, perimeter, and greenfield development. So overall, on a high level, I'm very encouraged by this official community plan and all the updates that it's going to bring, and hopefully transformation for the future. So with that said, I do have a couple of comments and questions about some specific changes. And one of them, I realize this is a minutia of detail, but I think it's worth asking the question. The difference in language between saying something as a policy statement, council may, or the city should, or consideration may be given, those types of statements versus saying the city will or the city must. I think really we want to try to be as specific as we possibly can be. So there's a number of instances. I'll just give a couple of examples. So instead of may consider developing an incentive program around, a policy and program to respond to rent evictions, or may consider developing an incentive program for residential development. I think we've all been very clear. We want to do that. The city, I think the language should be changed to reflect that the city will develop an incentive program, and we will develop a policy and program to respond to rent evictions. So there's a few examples of that here, and I'm wondering if Mr. Bucking can comment if there's any legal implications or implications that I'm missing in changing that language, other than to be a lot stronger on those things that we know are pressing and urgent priorities that we think can reasonably be accomplished within the next 10 years, versus more higher level, I'll use the phrase again, motherhood and apple pie type of things that people don't disagree with, but may not be a pressing and urgent priority.
Through the mayor?
Yeah, go ahead.
You've touched on a really interesting, important aspect of official community plans. And an official community plan, in essence, is a constitutional document. It sets out how you govern. It's an enabling document. It is not a document that requires you to do anything. So to have a statement in there that the city, will do this, X, Y, Z, doesn't actually make the city do that. Where it becomes an important document is when there's actually something that the city wants to do that's in conflict with the OCP. In that case, like changing the zoning where it's not permitted, you can't do that unless you change the plan. Having said that, it doesn't hurt to have a stronger intent in the document that says the city will do X, Y, Z. It's a stronger statement of intent, but it doesn't have the legal effect of making you do that. So it's constitutional, it's enabling, but it's not a document that makes you do something.
Understood. That gives me the clarity that I require, because I did look at a couple of those sections, particularly residential development and social and cultural policies around childcare. I know that's something that we've all been trying to be a little bit more than just advocates for. But I do appreciate that it doesn't hold us to anything one way or the other, but it is a statement of intent. So would you have any suggestions for us if we did want to strengthen some of the language of particular sections to say will versus may, or is that something that, I mean, for lack of a better phrase, is half a dozen of one and six of the other?
Well, it's a difficult question. Like, so when you say will, it's not going to have the effect of making you. Should maybe is a stronger term. The city should do that. That's stronger than may. But having said that, you could use the word will because it'll be understood as stronger. It's just that legally, there's nothing that will make you do that.
Okay, would you recommend then that I just type out a couple the clauses in particular that I think might warrant council's consideration for a bit of stronger intent?
I think it would be very useful to type out all the places that you think that the language could be strengthened and circulate and let staff and us take a look at that just to make sure that in the particular circumstance it's not creating a problem. But in general, I think that you can make that kind of language change.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's kind of I'm sorry to go into the weeds there. I just have a couple of more specific questions on the OCP, if that's all right.
Yes.
So I did very much what Councillor Adey alluded to in putting the current OCP up against this draft here, and there's a couple of, I'm not sure if they were oversights or if I just may have missed them being moved or phrased differently, but a couple of things that I didn't see explicitly mentioned was around the McBride Street entryway node. It's on page 32 of our current official community plan, but it's basically designating that where this vast majority of our rubber tire traffic comes in is through McBride, and there's basically 3 intersections right there that is your primary welcome to town that requires some very specific interventions for improvement, particularly around wayfinding signage and things of that nature. I didn't see that anywhere. The other piece was around the Fairview Bypass Road, which is on page 42 of our current official community plan. That one I think is incredibly important because not only does it open up a whole new world of light industrial development opportunities, but it would finally allow, I think in the long term, the city to take control of 2nd Avenue downtown if we can have that bypass become the new highways designation. And that may have been included. I'll give you the specific subsection number. It might have been what you're referencing is section 4.8.2 under transportation, subsection 2B. To me, the way that I read it was that's in reference to the port's private road that's already under construction between the container port and Ridley Island, but that may have been a reference to the Fairview bypass, so I'm just hoping you can comment on that. And then the last specific piece that I didn't see mentioned was around airport access and some of our long-term discussions and project planning in that regard, which is on page 45 of the official community plan. So I'm just wondering if you can comment on those 3 specifics that I don't know if I've just missed them or if they're not included for a specific reason.
Thank you, and through the mayor. So the McBride Street's entry node is not specifically brought out as a part of this OCP. The Vision 2030 document is what we've taken as the guiding land use strategy. Having said that, we do have development permit guidelines on an area by area basis, and they are robust. I would want to refer back to those documents and see what they say specifically about entry. If they and I'd also like to check against the language. So if it's okay with you, that I could have this as a takeaway for the next meeting to report back on the McBride Street entry node to see if it's captured somehow. I can tell you that the Fairview Bypass Road is included in the land use map, and not only is it included in the land use map, there is additional industrial development that's being added to that so that there's more viability to that road being built, in that if there's development there, the development can help pay for the road. So it is there. It's not identified, I don't think, in terms of the language in the plan, but it certainly is in the plan. If you wanted some additional language in there, we certainly could put that in. Airport access, I'd have to refer to the documents to take a look at that. I don't recall that.
I'm perfectly comfortable if you wouldn't mind taking those comments and report back at the next meeting. That would be very helpful.
If I can, there is one within the current OCP. There is a reference to the new airport ferry landing at Harbor Landing Park as a major initiative. Is that what you were referring to?
Yeah, and I guess maybe what I'm struggling with here, and you did kind of answer the question for me, is if something is included in the map, but there's no specific language, or if the language is quite high level, maybe if you could just talk a little bit for me about the interaction between the map and the language, and which one may take precedence, or if they both have equal standing in the eyes of the Local Government Act.
Well, if something's designated and identified on the map, it has standing, and it can stand on its own. So it doesn't necessarily need to have policy around it. So if the map, but that doesn't mean we couldn't put in a section under in transportation section to highlight the bypass, the Fairview bypass road, and so. I hope that answers it. It stands on its own if it's just in the map, but there's nothing wrong with augmenting.
Yeah, that's fine with me. That's all I wanted to ensure.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind, Mr. Mayor, I just have 2 more questions. Is that all right?
You absolutely.
So on the temporary use conditions section, 4.13.1. This is quite timely, obviously, given the lessons learned from the ports application about, I think, some of the shortcomings that we identified in our current process. So I'm wondering around subsection 2, there's no specific mention of site plan, which I think is something that we all struggled with. So I'm wondering, is this the appropriate place, or can or should a site plan be added to this specific subsection?
You mean the requirement for a site plan?
Correct, yeah.
I think that we'd put that in the development procedures bylaw.
Okay, if that's the more appropriate vehicle, then I'm fine with that. So that brings me to my last question, specifically around the environmental section. I'm really encouraged to see the commitment to the Paris Agreement targets. I think that's admirable. And I think we've all seen through the waves of environmental protests, obviously pre-COVID, that some of these words just aren't enough, that we really need to be supported by actions to get us there. So with that said, I'm looking at some of the commitments, and a couple of that I think may be missing. Just based on the city's community energy and emissions plan, what was identified was that just over half of our community emissions are from transportation. So I'm very glad to see commitments to improving our transit system and electrifying our transportation grid. Just over a third of community emissions were from buildings. So I think this is obviously what we're doing a job in here, is making sure that our land use policies, encouraging infill development, all of those things we can do to try to reduce emissions from our footprint. But what I don't see on the building front is any mention around district energy. And I know that is something that the city had previously contemplated to reduce corporate emissions. I'm thinking specifically of the Civic Center, Pool, Arena, Leicester Center area. I think that's it's a tremendous capital cost, but I think it's got some fantastic long-term return on investment, not only to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also save on energy costs. So that's the one piece I'm hoping you can comment on is any references to district energy and their potential. And then the other piece is one of the largest sources of community emissions is obviously the landfill, which we've talked quite a lot about and has been a big priority of this council. And there is reference to recycling, but not any reference to composting or to organics diversion. And I appreciate that there's a lot of complexities, obviously, with the relationship with the regional district and the recycling depot and how we may need to navigate that relationship. But I'm wondering if we could not include a reference to organics diversion as one of those. Again, it's a high upfront capital cost to get going, but I think the long-term dividend for us is not only diverting waste from the landfill, extending its life expectancy, but also turning a liability into an asset in the form of soil. And I think turning liabilities into assets is something we all know a little about from Watson Island. So I think we could take a lesson from that. So I'm wondering if you could just comment on those two things in particular around district energy and organics diversion.
So if the question is, can we include policy in the climate change section of the OCP on district energy? Yes, we can. We could certainly, suggest some language for that council to consider that at its next meeting. And same thing, you can include policy on landfill, specifically with regard to composting and organics diversion. I would want to, discuss with staff, to get some feedback and basically some feedback on how to approach that. But we could bring something back to you on those 2 points for consideration at a subsequent meeting.
I would really appreciate that. Thanks very much for your time and bearing with me through all these questions.
No worries.
Rob.
Councillor Cunningham here on Councillor Moreau's last two things about composting and organic diversion, I should say. Well, those are big items, and not only that, but I've often toted some sort of incinerator that's used in Europe for our landfill, and rather than using cells and polluting more land as we progress, having some sort of plan in the future to get away from landfill waste and start using something that creates energy in the future to not only run maybe the landfill operation, but anywhere near it. And this is a big thing in Europe right now, and you've got countries that are diverting all their waste to certain other countries, and if their emissions on these furnaces or boilers and that are meeting European standards, I think they definitely meet North American standards, and I think it's something that I would like to see also mentioned in the OCP, that in the future we should be looking at alternative methods of disposal instead of landfill.
Mr. Mayor, through the councillor, we can include policy in there, and I think that's called waste to energy, and it certainly is implemented very effectively in Europe. It's been explored, in North America. Having a supportive policy in there for that to be explored, I think would be quite reasonable to do.
Thank you.
Rob, quick question for you. So, given that, and then we'll have more discussion, I'm sure other councillors have more to say, but just in terms of just the process for tonight, given that this is more broader changes that might need some fleshing out, would it be more appropriate that we do first reading tonight for to have a second reading and say in January with these changes presented, or because it would be going to public hearing if we did the first two, correct?
Mr. Mayor, I think that you could do first and second readings tonight. You're looking at it, if you give a reading, you're looking at amendments anyways.
Okay.
We could have a report to you for your first meeting in January to consider any amendments. But in the interim, we'd have the ability to get the documents out
To referrals.
to the agency that we need to refer them out to. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay, that sounds okay. All right. Other comments from council? So just to be even more clear then, so the resolution that's on the floor right now is just to pass first and second reading. Do I need to add an additional resolution that you're going to be bringing amendments back, or are we just going to have the understanding that you're going to bring back some amendments for us to consider in January? No resolution needed?
Mr. Mayor, I think that's discretionary. Right now we have a list of things to do, but one way to hold us to it is to have a resolution.
Right. Well, corporate administrator is saying we don't need a resolution, but we can bring the amendments forward in January, so we can pass it as is, so that the referrals can be beginning the referrals, because obviously some of these changes that we're looking at aren't going to be changing how the agencies see our OCP, which is fine. Okay. So, is there any other further discussion here from council on the OCP? Okay, so the resolution's on the floor. Is there anyone opposed? Okay, motion's carried. Okay, Rob, thank you very much for your time. We can let you log off now. I'm going to move into reports and questions and inquiries from members of council now.
Thank you very much.
Have a great
Good night.
evening. See you in the new year. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year.
And to all of you, well,
Thank you, Rob.
thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to
Thanks,
do a
Rob.
quick report. So now, with what we've just done, so we're looking into the new year now in January to complete the OCP, to complete the zoning bylaw, and to complete the community or the downtown and housing incentives that we discussed at the last meeting. So those will be moving forward into the new year, and then at some point when it's appropriate to do the public hearing, we'll be moving forward on that. I believe tomorrow we're going to be putting up a thermometer in the front of City Hall. The Salvation Army is raising $80,000 to construct a new building, essentially, for their soup kitchen. Is that correct?
They're renovating on Granville Court, and they're incorporating the food bank that's on Fraser Street into Granville Court.
Right. So those renovations will be underway, and we're going to be raising $80,000. So we're going to put a community thermometer together for the community to raise funds. They needed $95,000. The city has contributed $15,000 this year through our community enhancement grant. So now we're going to be looking at the other $80,000 from the community, and I believe it's going to be a great project. So hopefully the community will come and support that initiative. As many folks have heard today, there is new orders from the provincial health officer. So obviously this Christmas and New Year is going to look a lot different. And all the existing orders basically have been extended till January 8th now. So this will be our last council meeting of the year 2020, a year I know that we're all never going to forget. But I want to, on behalf of council, just wish everybody a merry, safe Christmas and New Year's this year. To just follow all the health guidelines, and hopefully by the end of 2021, we're going to see ourselves in a much more positive situation globally. We're all in this together, and we've all been working together closely to mitigate the impacts and limit the spread of this virus that we've all been facing, and looking for better days ahead. In the meantime, us at the city here have been moving ahead on all the initiatives, and I'm hoping to get a community update out before the new year is out on all the things that we're up to via social media, as I usually do by the New Year's Eve. And so hopefully we can get that out again this year. But just want to make sure that everybody has a safe holiday and just to stay within your bubbles. And I know it's going to be tough not to have many extended families and friends and things like that, which is usually what it is. But it's hopefully as the last year we're going to have to do that. And if you do it now, that means we're not going to be prolonging the situation any further. So that being said, I'll just pass it off to any members of council that want to say anything here. And very proud of the work we've done this year and over the last 2 years, actually, to really move some of the really big Lego blocks for this community and some of the tougher policy challenges. And appreciate all of council's views this evening as well on the bylaws and such. So is there any comments or questions from council?
Yeah, Councillor Scott Morgan.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate also a lot of the good work that the staff are doing. You know, despite the circumstances, we've got quite a lot of things in motion, and I just want to thank our senior administration as well as the staff at City Hall and Public Works just for their continuous work throughout this whole process. The other thing I wanted to mention, though, and just talk on briefly, just was that with a lot of these lockdown experiences and rolling up and creeping up to the holidays, we find that a lot of the things that are happening behind the scenes and the silent pandemic in the background is mental health. So I just want to let members of the community know that there are resources and supports in place for those that are struggling, and that we will get through this together, and we're going to see brighter days. And although we're creeping up to the holidays, and a lot of folks are kind of getting the tone out there and kind of getting the feel for things, and it's sounding like for a lot of folks they feel Christmas is canceled in some ways, but there's ways that we can get around this, and we will get through this. And I just want members of the community know that, and watch out for each other and check in with your friends and family and just make sure everyone's doing all right. The holiday season is hard enough as it is, let alone with the isolation that comes with our current circumstances. So just everyone hang in there and support one another. And thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott Morgan. Great words. Any other council's reports?
Just a quick comment. I'd like to mirror what Councillor Reid Morvan said. I'd like to wish all our staff a Merry Christmas as best as it can be, and I'd like to also kudos to them for the job they've done this year. They go unrecognized in so many ways. Especially the executive staff at City Hall and the girls in the front desk and that, as well as the yard. Unfortunately, we've had one of the worst summers and looks like one of the worst winters we're leading up to. And these guys are out there every day fixing water mains or working in those conditions and that. And I don't even like walking around in those conditions, never mind working in them. So kudos to them. And I hope you all enjoy the holidays and be safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other councillors?
I'd like to say something, if I may.
Absolutely.
Councillor Adie. And I know, Mayor Brain, you referred to this in a Facebook post, but the last couple of years, on or around December 6th, I've had the opportunity to participate and speak at memorial for the 14 victims of the Montreal Polytechnic shootings. And by way of explanation for people who aren't familiar with what has happened here around that event, the organizers put together a really moving and touching tribute and memorial of that event with a view to carrying on the lessons that we need to learn from it. So it sort of segues into what we're talking about with the COVID restrictions. That event, of course, was not launched in the same way this year. And I think that's one of the tragedies of all of this is that some of the really important benchmark events that we do and culturally to reflect on the events that we experience can't happen in the same way. The Remembrance Day was the same. So I do want to mention that. And in particular, just a shout out to, I think, an age group that I think is most challenged by what we're facing at the moment, and that's young people who they're hardwired to be social, and I think for many it's proving to be very challenging. And I just want to express my support for that age group and let them know, as Councillor Scott Morgan said, to reach out if they need to. And finally, I'll echo what other councillors are saying about the work of staff. I think they're doing a brilliant job, under difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Okay, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by
So moved.
Councillor Cunningham, seconded by
Skelton Morgan.
Councillor Skelton Morburn. Okay, all's in favor or any opposed? Meeting's adjourned. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, everyone. Have a great evening.
Yeah. Yeah, have a great evening, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night all.